The dirt road stretched ahead through the sparse African Bushveld, its ruts and bumps jostling the worn SUV. Nate Daniels gripped the steering wheel, eyes fixed forward through the dusts. Smeared windshield as acacia trees and thorny scrub whipped past the windows. His twin daughters chattered softly in the back seat, pointing out baboons and occasional glimpses of giraffe between the foliage. The familiar landscape should have brought him solace in its vast, timeless emptiness. But all Nate felt was empty himself, a hollow ache in his chest that no amount of miles or months could ease. A year had passed since the crash that ripped his wife Sarah from his arms, yet the pain remained as raw as the first night he returned home alone. His grief felt like something physical inhabiting his body, an invisible parasite sapping his will to live each day. Coming to the Martin battles, Nature Reserve had been Kathleen's suggestion, hoping a change of scenery might stir her father from his depression. The twins, Amy and Johanna, were excited at the prospect of seeing wild animals up close in their natural habitat, anything to distract them all from the hole in their family. Nate wasn't convinced it would help, but he owed it to his daughters to try moving forward, no matter how impossible that seemed. As the dusty road ended and blended into the sparse beginnings of the reserve, Nate spotted a familiar figure standing beside a worn Land Cruiser parked by the welcome sign. Martin Battles lifted a hand in greeting, his worn khakis and shirt stained with sweat and dirt as usual. Their friendship went back over a decade to when Nate first volunteered at the reserve as a newly graduated vet. Back in the earliest days when Martin was forging this sanctuary from inhospitable bush. Nate parked beside Martin's vehicle and swung open the driver's side door, his boots crunching in the gravel. The bush sounds intensified. Cicadas, birds calling, insects buzzing in the rising heat. A breeze stirred the shimmering grasses and carried faint, musky lion scents on the wind. For a moment, Nate closed his eyes and breathed in the wild essence of this place, feeling it seep into his soul like balm. "Good to see you, my friend," Martin said, in his deep rumble, striding over to clasp Nate's forearm in a brotherly handshake. His eyes, dark and keen as an eagle's, searched Nate's face with concern. "It's been too long." Nate nodded, not trusting himself to speak past the lump in his throat. Martin had been his rock in the months after Sarah's death, helping him make sense of a world gone mad. In many ways, Martin knew him better than anyone's. Martin knew him better than anyone. All his hopes, fears, failures, and triumphs over the past decade. But Nate still felt raw, flayed open by lingering grief, and deeply ashamed Martin had to see him this way, after pulling himself together for so long. He opened the rear passenger door. "Girls, come say hi to Mr. Battles." Amy and Johanna tumbled out, darting across the uneven ground with breezy, adolescent grace. They both paused a moment to appreciate the view, rolling golden hills stretching to distant tree lines, the reserve unfurling around them like a vast abstract painting. Then they turned shy smiles up at Martin. "Look how much you two have grown," Martin said, crouching to their level with a kindly smile. "I still remember when you used to ride on my shoulders and feed the impalas by hand. You must have stories to tell me of your adventures since last visit." "Yes." Amy and Johanna beamed, charmed as always by Martin's easy manner. Nate felt a pang watching them, a reminder of Sarah's gentle kindred spirit for which the girls still ached. Forcing a smile, he pushed down that surge of grief like rising bile. "Martin, thank you for having us. I hope it's not too much of an imposition." "Nonsense." Martin rose, giving Nate's shoulder a brief squeeze. "You and the girls are always welcome here. Come, I'll show you to your cabin and we'll catch up over sundowners." He led them along a winding track through low bushes dotted with orange blooms, purple lichens climbing knotted tree trunks like intricate plaster casts. The landscape breathed with hidden life. Lizards darting between rocks, a burst of small birds exploding from cover. Through sparser areas, Nate glimpsed expansive vistas stretching to the horizon and vast skies gliding with wisps of cirrus cloud. A pang of envy struck him seeing Martin stride easily through this Eden. While Nate had spent his youth volunteering at the reserve and dreamed of dedicating his career to conservation, life had swept him down a different current. After Sarah joined an international aid organization, he followed to support her cause. But part of Nate still yearned for simpler days, surrounded by the wild rhythms and creatures he loved. At least his daughters could experience some joy in this unspoiled place, if only for a brief while. The path opened onto a secluded clearing, tucked amid rocky hills. A sturdy wooden cabin stood overlooking a watering hole splotched with pink flamingos, its thatched roof blending into the surrounding foliage. Nearby stood a smaller cottage, where Martin lived alone, caring for the reserve, like a benevolent shepherd while operating on shoestring funding and raised donations. "Wow," Amy breathed as they stepped onto the cabin's porch. She gazed across sweeping vistas unmarred by fences or boundary lines, marveling at such open spaciousness after city life. Martin smiled proudly. "I'm glad you like it. You'll have the run of this side of the reserve. Plenty of game trails to explore if you're careful. Just stay within whistle range of the lodge, all right?" "We will." "Thanks, Mr. Battles," Johanna said, and she and Amy darted inside to claim the best bedrooms. Nate lingered on the porch beside Martin, both men falling silent as they drank in the deepening orange sunset over endless horizons. Bird songs wound down to an evening chorus while insects and frogs tuned their instruments for the coming night. A warm breeze carried wood smoke and hint of faraway rains. For the first time in over a year, Nate felt himself relaxing minutely into the familiar primordial rhythms of this wild place. His soul breathed easier knowing his daughters had found joy again, if only for a moment. Martin passed him a cool beer from the cooler, as was their tradition, after long days. "How have you been holding up, my friend?" Nate sighed, swallowing a gulp that caught in his throat. "Oh, you know, it comes in waves. Some days the pain feels like it'll swallow me whole. Others I can almost function normally. But it never really lets go." He took another pull from the bottle, staring into the ruby sunset as if answers might emerge from its dying light. "I keep thinking, if I can make it through each day, maybe the pain will lessen over time. But it just doesn't." Martin nodded slowly, chewing a long blade of grass. His eyes lost their focus as he gazed out over rippling grasslands, burnished orange and gold by the setting sun. "Grief has its own strange rhythms, my friend. It lingers when we think it should pass, yet fades when hope seems lost. All we can do is keep putting one foot in front of the other, as you are doing, and trust the healing will come in its own way. And trust the healing will come in its own way, in time. There is light ahead. Nights. Nights." His deep calm soothed Nate like balm. He felt gratitude beyond words for Martin's steady friendship all these years. They lapsed into a pensive silence, drinking in the balmy dusk and listening to the reserve wake into glorious evening song around them. Across the grasslands, a lone hyena cackled in the distance as night began its velvet unfurling over the bush. The girls emerged, grinning, cheeks flushed from exploring their new surroundings. "Papa, can we help Mr. Battles feed the animals before dinner?" Amy asked, eyes shining. Nate couldn't remember the last time he'd seen such open joy on his daughters' faces. His heart ached with love and loss, love for them, and lingering ache for Sarah that would never fade. He realized, numbly, he would give anything to keep that innocent light in their eyes from dimming, as it must for all who endure life's pains. Martin's deep chuckle rumbled through the gathering dusk. "Of course. Come along. Let's see who's waiting for their supper." He led them down a winding path into thickening shadows, lanterns swinging to light the way as the twins skipped ahead, giggling. Far into the darkening bush, unseen eyes watched their passage, a lithe golden shadow slinking between trees, wary but unafraid. The morning sun broke in a wash of molten gold over rippling horizons, banishing night shadows to crannies and thickets. Nate woke before dawn, as usual, slipping from the cabin while his daughters still slumbered. He pulled on boots and followed a dusty game trail toward the reservoir, breathing in cool, brushed, velvet air, crisp with promise of the new day. Birds cascaded into song all around, weavers twittering, kingfishers piping, fish eagles crying triumphantly as they rose on thermal drafts. Small creatures rustled in undergrowth, while larger grazers drifted like ephemeral spirits through mist veils, rising off the water. Nate drank in deep lungfuls of wildness, feeling it clear grit from his veins with each breath. This was what he needed. The primordial rhythms and vast solitudes that never changed, offering respite from life's turmoil. By the time the sun crested treetops, in a brilliant yolk, gold orb, Nate had circled half the reservoir. He paused on a rise overlooking grassy flats, golden in morning light, listening to the susurrate whispers of nascent day, grass blades stroking each other in the breeze, geckos chittering as they woke to hunt, the quiet plop of fish rising through mist to feed. A herd of impala stalked along the shoreline, moms calling their spotted fawns to follow as they began their daily meander. Nate smiled softly, soothed by these small miracles unfolding as always, century after century. Then movement caught his eye among acacia trunks, a dark zigzagging shape moving with fluid hunter's grace. His smile faded as a familiar prickle traced his nape, an instinctive alertness taking over. Rising higher, Nate lifted binoculars for a clearer view. His blood ran cold. A large, tawny male lion prowled along the tree line, tail lashing purposefully. His thick mane and well-muscled body marked him as an experienced hunter in his prime. But something in his eyes was off. They glinted with an uncanny, feverish light as the lion surveyed the grassy clearing below with an eerie intensity, as if scanning for something specific. A manned goat bounds in thick undergrowth, then burst across the opening, bleating frantically as it fled. But the lion made no move to chase. He only watched the fleeing prey pass with strangely detached, almost obsessive focus. A grim sensation gripped Nate's gut. He knew lions well from his volunteer days, knew their instinctive behaviors and signs of distress or imbalance. Something was very wrong with this male. Carefully marking the lion's location, he turned and hurried back to the cabins as quickly as the rugged terrain allowed, mind racing. Martin had already risen and begun preparations for the morning, starting a fire in the rustic hearth. He looked up quizzically as Nate strode in, still breathing hard, and poured himself coffee with shaking hands. "I saw a lion up by the reservoir," Nate said, without preamble between gulps of hot brew. Martin nodded calmly. "Many lions live on the reserve, my friend. What seemed unusual about this one?" Nate took a deep breath to steady his racing pulse before replying. His behavior, Martin. He wasn't hunting or territorial. Just prowling with a strange, obsessive focus, and his eyes. There was something not right about them. "This animal has been disturbed. I'm certain of it." Martin's brow furrowed as he processed this. Grinding chilies between grinding stones for their eggs. "You know lions best of any. I will take a team to track and observe him. See if we can determine what's amiss. But for now, let's not worry the girls. This is still their wild Eden." Nate nodded reluctantly, still unsettled. But he knew Martin would investigate properly, as was his way. After a hearty breakfast around the fire, the girls helped Martin load grass bales and water into the Land Cruiser. "We'll be replenishing trails while also looking into that lion sighting," Martin explained. "You're welcome to join or spend the day exploring. Just stay within whistle range, as always." "I'll keep an eye on things here," Nate said, mustering a smile for the girls' sake. They drove off down the winding track as Nate cleared dishes, feeling uneasy tensions coil in his gut. Hours passed without word as the sun climbed overhead in a hazy, azure dome. Nate paced the cabin, checking weapons, though reassuring himself it was likely a hungry male driven to odd fixation by past injury or stress. He was chopping vegetables for stew when Amy burst through the screen door, chest heaving. "Papa, come quick. We saw something in the grass. It's hurt, real bad." Alarms jolted through Nate's body. He snatched up his rifle and followed Amy at a run down the path she indicated. Johanna close behind. Rounding a bend brought them up short, both girls crying out fearfully. A young male goat sprawled in the grass, torn open from groin to rib cage in a mass of gore and intestines. Flies already swarmed the carcass, feasting on spilled viscera. But most horrifying was the mange. Ridden lion crouched a rod's length away, peeling strips of flesh from ribs to devour with an almost manic intensity, uncaring of its bloody muzzle and forepaws. Its eyes, when it lifted its gore, masked face, glinted with the same unnatural fever light Nate glimpsed that morning. This was no natural hunt. It was slow, systematic violation of its prey's carcass and within spitting distance of the cabins. A chill clawed up Nate's spine as the truth became hideously clear. They were dealing with a man, Eater. An ominous silence gripped the cabin as dusk descended, long shadows creeping across the windows. Nate paced agitatedly while the girls huddled together on the couch, Amy stroking Johanna's hair with a forced calm she did not feel. No one had seen or heard from Martin since they drove off that morning. Nate racked the chamber of his hunting rifle with cold determination. "That lion has crossed the line," he said grimly. "If Martin isn't back by nightfall, we head into the bush and track it ourselves. I won't wait and hope it doesn't attack again." Amy bit her lip, trying to hide her terror at the thought of venturing into the darkening wilderness. But she knew arguing was fruitless when her father got that steely look. All they could do was pray Martin returned safely, to take the lead. As dusk deepened into an inky African night, headlamps swept across the cabin screen door. Martin lumbered inside, trailed by his wary scouts, bodies drooping with exhaustion. But his drooping with exhaustion but his eyes were keen and calculating as ever beneath the triangle of light, illuminating his weathered face. "We tracked the male's movements all afternoon," he sighed, sinking into an armchair. His brutalized the goat nearer than any hunting catch at a human settlement. "There is no doubt. This is a man-eater. We're lucky he hasn't attacked humans yet." A chill crawled up Nate's spine, as Martin confirmed what he already knew to be true and horrible. A beast that kills for pleasure, not sustenance, is driven purely by instinct, and its next victims could easily be his daughters playing innocently in the grass. He took a calming breath. "What's our plan of action, then?" Martin ran a hand over his stubbled chin, shadows accentuating the deep lines of care and responsibility etched in his face. "Based on fresh tracks, the male is stalking nearer each night. Tomorrow at dawn, we'll set up hides and cameras around the perimeter to monitor his movements. If he comes within range, we'll have no choice but to take the shot." Nate nodded grimly. "I'll stand watch through the night. Keep extra eyes out. You all get some rest. Sounds like you've had a long day already." Though Martin protested, he was fit to stand vigil as well, Nate insisted. Weary, the scouts and reserve manager took their leave, gratefully for the night. Silence fell like a suffocating blanket over the dark reserve as last silhouettes faded into the dense bush. Nate checked weapons and perimeter one final time before sitting on the porch, rifle across his lap. Cicadas sawed their nightly chorus, while early stars pierced the velvety realm above in icy pinpricks. Somewhere out there, in the black void, lurked a killer with an unnatural gleaming lust for human flesh. The thought sent cold tremors through Nate that had nothing to do with the crisp night. Far past midnight, as even crickets lapsed into fitful rest, a tortured squeal rent the stillness. Nate sat bolt upright, every nerve ending firing to alertness. It came from near the tree line, a high keening that chilled his bones, cut off with choking brutality. His blood ran cold. Within moments, the cry was answered by another, then more in surrounding thickets. Hyenas, emboldened by the lion's kill, closing in for their grisly feast. Revulsion curdled Nate's insides at the cacophony of sinister feasting, carried clearly on the night breeze. Sometime later, when even the hyena's grunts faded into sated silence, flickering movement caught the corner of Nate's eye. He lifted binoculars, pulse surging, scanning the gloom. There, a massive golden shadow, ghosted between trees, much too near the cabins, pausing to peer through the dark, as if sensing watchful eyes upon him. Twin moons of unnatural fever. Glow locked with Nate's own, penetrating the night's veil, sending a primal thrill of alarm through him that made his hands shake on the rifle stock. The man-eater was coming ever closer with each midnight prowl, emboldened by easy kills and the human's absence of retaliation. Nate knew with cold certainty they were rapidly losing whatever tenuous control or time they had left to end this nightmare before it fully spiraled into unspeakable tragedy. The hunter had become the hunted on his own turf, and only the coming dawn would reveal where the apex predator intended to finally make his lethal strike. Pale morning light seeped through cracks in the shuttered windows as Nate entered his daughter's bedroom, feeling as if he hadn't slept at all. Amy sat bolt upright in bed, clutching the blankets to her chest with wide, frightened eyes. "Daddy, I heard scary noises all night. What's out there?" Nate settled beside her, drawing Amy into a firm embrace despite his own galloping nerves. "It's all right, darling. Mr. Battles and I are dealing with a problem animal, but we won't let anything happen to you or Joe. Try to get some rest. I'll be right here." Though clearly still shaken, Amy nodded and burrowed back under the quilt as Nate moved to rouse her twin. Johanna blinked sleepily until the previous day's traumatic discovery surfaced in her memory. Her bottom lip trembled as she gazed up at Nate with swirling emotions too complex for a girl her age. "Come help me make breakfast," he said gently. "The smells will wake up Amy too." In the galley, Nate began preparing porridge and fruit while the twins set the small table. Lively birdsong filtered through open windows, incongruous with the pall that clung to the interior, despite the sun's ascent. Nate kept one ear tuned for any disturbance outside as he worked. Knew the girls were pretending normalcy for his sake. They had just sat down to eat when crunching footsteps approached on the gravel path. Martin strode into view, looking haggard but determined, trailed by several scouts. "Any sign of him?" Nate asked quietly as the girls greeted their friends outside. Martin shook his head, expression grim. "No direct sightings yet, but we found another fresh kill. A young waterbuck, only partly consumed. He's moving boldly now, in broad daylight. We must end this today before." A sudden shriek split the morning, cutting off Martin's grim prediction. Nate's blood turned to ice in his veins as he recognized Amy's voice rising in panic from outside. He and Martin exploded from the cabin, grabbing rifles as they charged into the bush, blindly following her cries. Barely 50 yards into scruffy acacia, they stumbled into a nightmare scene. The twins stood frozen in horror near a game trail, Johanna clutching Amy, who pointed shaking at the grass. There, sprawled in the open, lay the mauled carcass of a young buck torn nearly in half, intestines spilled across gnawed bones, ribcage peeled open, head twisted at an obscene angle. And crouched no more than 6 paces beyond, gore, matted golden flanks, heaving as he peeled great strips of meat, was the glaring man, eater. His muzzle, paws, and thick fur dripped glistening fluids, eyes gleaming with an unhinged thirst for carnage as they flicked between the delicate human morsels and their protectors bearing down with enraged bellows. For an endless, paralyzed moment, man and beast eyed each other across the grisly killing ground, the cloying reek of death permeating everything. The lion rumbled a deep, guttural warning as Martin and Nate lifted their rifles, too late, realizing the girls stood directly in their lines of fire. Amy let out an involuntary whimper of terror. With a snarl, the lion lunged towards the easy prey, blood-stained jaws gaping. A thunderous crack split the air as Nate pulled the trigger without hesitation. His shot caught the beast high in the shoulder, deflecting its charge just as Martin's rifle barked. The man. Ida screamed and thrashed, a massive paw swiping inches from the paralyzed twins' faces before crashing into bushes. "Run. Get back to the cabin now," Nate roared as the man, Ida's pain. Crazed screams rebounded through the dense bush. The twins tore off blindly towards safety, while Martin and the scouts gave chase, firing again and again to drive the raging killer from their territory, once and for all. By the time the twins tumbled sobbing into the clearing, shots still echoed all around as the great battle came to its violent conclusion. The twins huddled together on the cabin porch, jumping at every distant crack of gunfire rippling through the dense bush. Their chests heaved with tears as horrible images replayed in tight loops through traumatized minds. "I want Mommy," Johanna whimpered into Amy's shirt, shuddering. Amy stroked her hair with tender, shaking hands, lips pressed tight against her own anguished sobs. She fought to stay strong for her twin, though terror clawed inside her ribcage like some feral beast. Thankfully, the rifle shots grew more sporadic as daylight progressed. By mid-morning, an eerie calm settled over the wilderness once more. Birds stirred cautiously from disturbed roosts to resume calls, muted by adrenaline. Several tense hours passed with no sign of pursuit or continuation of the violent clash. Exhausted, filthy hunting parties emerged from thickets like specters, grim faces betraying the horrific ordeal endured in tracking a wounded man, either bent on vengeance. Martin strode directly to the twins, gathering them close with fierce protectiveness that soothed without words the lingering trauma. His eyes, when he met Nate's hollow gaze, conveyed a complex blend of victory, frustration, and profound regret without uttering a syllable. The man-eater lay dead a kilometer from the cabins, but not before eviscerating a beloved scout in its final ferocious moments. No triumph could erase such losses or undo the horror imprinted on innocent young minds. "Try to rest. I'll stand watch," Nate rasped, voice shredded by smoke and anguish. Martin nodded wearily and ushered the drained twins inside, murmuring reassurances as he settled them on the sofa with blankets. Outside, choppy repairs started under grim supervision. Fortifying fences, replenishing stores, mending both flesh and spirit after a harrowing clash no one could have foreseen. That evening, as the twins' traumas eased into fitful sleep, Martin lingered on the porch, deep in contemplation. "My friend, there is something I must do. A critical mistake was made that nearly cost precious lives today." Nate nodded mutely, perceiving Martin's impending decision and unable to find solace for either man. Their Eden had shown its thorny underbelly in the cruelest of ways. No refuge was pure or problem solved so easily for man or beast. All they could do was carry on amid life's harsh lessons and swear to heal and prevent such brutal fates from befalling another soul if fate allowed. Under cover of deepest night, Martin slipped silently from the cabin. He melted into the surrounding wilderness as if summoned by it alone, vanishing into the dense bush with only his lantern to guide passage through this conflicted place he had come to love and protect with fierce devotion. For better or worse, come what may, the morning would bring its own revelations without that mighty titan of conservation to shepherd the way. The morning dawned hazy and still, as if even nature held its breath, awaiting revelation. Nate awoke before first light as usual, slipping from the cabin while the girls yet slept. Drawing deep lungfuls of crisp air, he scanned the surreal calm blanketing everything in gauzy half-light. No footfalls disturbed litter or brush, save small creatures resuming routine through dew, damp grasses. An eerie mood permeated the reserve. Or perhaps it was the awareness, weighing heavy in Nate's soul of impending answers to last night's unspoken questions. His rounds brought him full circle back to the main compound without sign. Martin's cottage stood dark and lifeless, worry surging cold in Nate's gut. He entered cautiously, lighting the stove to brew strong chai as dawn pierced misted treetops like golden spear points. Steam fogged the small windows as Nate sipped, waiting, forcing patience. But when even the sunrise failed to rouse his friend, dread consumed reason's thin veneer. Grabbing supplies, Nate strode into the awakening bush, checking familiar trails as daylight swelled around him. Hours passed fruitlessly, sweeping the dense landscape, Martin's absence gnawing Nate's composure to fraying shreds. By mid-morning, sweat dried salty on his skin, and worry curled his stomach hollow, but still no clues arose. He was seriously considering waking the girls for an organized search party when rustling ahead made him freeze, raising his rifle on instinct alone. A squat yellow mongoose darted across the track, pausing to consider Nate with beady black eyes before ambling off about its business. His tense shoulders relaxed fractionally, until cracking brush heralded a larger approach. Nate whirled, safety clicking off the rifle, ready to defend against any lingering threat still stalking these woods. Through dense foliage strode Martin, appearing unscathed but eyes downcast in profile as if carrying the weight of the world. Relief flooded Nate, followed swiftly by a surge of anger for the grief caused. But one look at Martin's careworn mien quelled any reproof, leaving an uneasy, expectant silence. "My friend, I must ask a favor," Martin rasped finally, without preamble. "Watch over the reserve in my absence. I cannot stay while this dark pall hangs. A grievous error was made that I must atone for through solitary prayer and reflection. Only the wilderness can help me find peace to continue our noble cause." Nate peered deeply into shadowed eyes, discerning naked anguish and self-recrimination beneath stalwart facade. He grasped Martin's forearm tightly. "This place, these noble goals, they are as much yours as any man's, and mistakes are human. We carry on through shared burden. Return when soul finds solace. My family and I will hold the fort till then." A glimmer of gratitude broke Martin's grim expression. With a tight nod, he turned and melted once more into dense bush, footsteps fading swiftly as if borne on the breeze. Nate watched his lone figure diminish into the vast wilderness, hoping expedient absolution might lift this good man's spirit from its grim depths before shadows took permanent hold. Then, shoulders squared against the tasks ahead, he turned for home with renewed resolution. The days that followed passed in a blur of activity for Nate, as he endeavored to care for the reserve alone until Martin's return. With the girls' natural inquisitiveness returning as trauma faded, it took all his wits corralling them safely, while carrying out myriad practical tasks. He repaired fences weakened by escaping wildlife, replenished dwindling stores from distant outposts, and tracked game movements to monitor any irregularities. Nate struggled with growing concern for his absent friend, warring against responsibilities, mounting each day. The toll showed in new lines, creasing his brow and slumped shoulders as dusk found him exhausted each night. One evening, nearly a week after Martin's departure, Nate started a roaring fire against the coolness descending. Warmth and fragrant wood smoke soothed frazzled nerves as he ladled stew into bowls for the twins. Lost in thought, too absorbed, he failed to notice Amy's approach until a small hand tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, where's Mr. Battles? We miss him. When is he coming back?" Nate sighed wearily. "I don't know, darling. These lands heal his heart in times of sadness. All we can do is stay strong, like he'd want, until he finds his way again." Amy scuffed her foot, lip wobbling. But what if the mean lion hurt him too? Her words pierced Nate's weary armor like daggers. igniting mounting frustrations amid helplessness over forces beyond control. He snapped with unintentional harshness. "Just be patient. Just be patient. Mr. Battles knows this bush better than anyone. Now eat your dinner." Tears welled as Amy fled inside. Johanna watched with wide, hurt eyes, tiny shoulders hunching under the weight of yet more turmoil. Her young minds could not comprehend. Nate dropped his head into hands, rubbing grit from stinging eyes. Self-loathing curdling his insides. Self-loathing curdling his insides. He could not protect his girls from reality's harsh lessons, no matter how he tried. That night, a massive thunderstorm rolled over the reserve, winds howling fit to rip thatch from the little cabin's roof. Heavy rains lashed windows in opaque gray sheets, concealing the turmoil raging inside as well. Nate paced fitfully, while the twins cried themselves to sleep. Trauma resurfacing amid the violent onslaught of nature. By midnight, even he could keep restless vigil no more, collapsing onto the creaking bed in mental and physical exhaustion. Some indeterminate time later, Nate jolted awake with a gasp, heart pounding irrationally fast. Strange sounds filtered through the roar of elements outside. Cracking brush, heavy footfalls, splashing near. Grabbing his rifle, he eased open the cabin door against buffeting wind, squinting into impenetrable blackness. A massive shape loomed through the driving rain, materializing from the night. Nate raised his weapon on instinct until lightning flickered, illuminating a familiar broad-shouldered silhouette drenched to the bone. Soaked khakis hanging heavily from his tall frame. Relief and anger battled within Nate's heaving chest until Martin rasped wearily, "May I take shelter a while, my friend?" The storm continued its violent symphony, long into dank dawn. But inside, two old comrades found solace through sharing burdens once more around a crackling fire. The storm finally broke, as dawn lightened the skies, leaving behind a drenched yet rinsed landscape. Martin crouched by the hearth, stirring a pot of fragrant porridge, shadows obscuring his face. The twins slept curled together on the couch, freed from night terrors by sheer exhaustion. Nate studied Martin closely, wishing answers unnecessary, but knowing his silence hid inner turmoil still unresolved. At last, Martin broke the heavy quiet without looking up. "My friend, a grave error was made that risks lives. I must put things right." Nate stiffened, immediately understanding Martin's intent. "No, we face this together as family." Martin only shook his head, setting down the wooden spoon. "This beast is cunning. It outwitted every trap already. Alone in its territory, I can learn its patterns to craft a trap, ensuring its end, with no risk to innocents who've suffered enough." "And if it bests you instead?" Nate demanded, fear twisting in his gut. "My daughters need their father. This reserve needs its founder." Martin met his gaze steadily. "If I fail, you are more than capable of shouldering responsibility in my stead, but I cannot rest until this menace is vanquished for good." Nate saw the resolve in Martin's eyes and knew further argument was futile. He sighed heavily. "Very well, but I insist on assisting the planning at least, and we involve the best trackers to increase success." Martin nodded gratefully. Over platters of porridge and strong chai, the men pored over maps and game trails, discussing the lion's previous movements and likeliest ambush points. By midday, a cunning plan had formed to lure the predator using bait into a carefully positioned kill zone, where the hunters concealed in camouflaged hides could take the single clean shot needed. Heavy rain had cleared the air, leaving trails discernible once more. That afternoon, Martin and a team of trackers slipped into the bush like ghosts to set the trap under dreary skies finally clearing. Nate paced the cabin, nerves coiled tighter with each passing hour as daylight waned. He prayed the intricate plan held no flaws to invoke, that killer's fury once more, and that Martin emerged unscathed from the confrontation, now imminent under gathering stars. All they could do was wait and hope. Swift justice met the man. Eater that night, restoring fragile peace to their wild Eden. As dusk deepened into an inky veil, first stars awakening, cracks of rifle fire startled nesting birds from the resplendent sycamore. Echoes rebounded through thick bush from some distance, then fell still under a breathless hush. In the empty darkness stretching ahead, any outcome remained unknowable. A heavy quiet descended over the darkened bush as night fully took hold. Cicadas sawed their songs under a vast tapestry of stars, unknown in civilized spaces. Nate paced the cabin, straining his ears for any sound carried on the breeze. The twins slept fitfully, worn out by worry and trauma's aftermath. As midnight came and went without word, dread gripped Nate's heart ever tighter. He was seriously debating, flouting Martin's warnings and venturing an armed search when shadows stirred outside. Heart in throat, Nate strode onto the porch. Just as familiar silhouettes emerged from the opaque night. Relief crashed over him, seeing Martin lead his team unharmed from the dense bush. But the trackers' grim faces and tense gaits betrayed a vicious struggle endured beneath the stars. Nate met Martin's eyes, searching for answers, finding only a haunted darkness there that wrenched his gut. "We laid the trap as planned," Martin rasped, leaning heavily against the cabin. The lion took the bait easily, but as I took aim, it seemed to sense betrayal, snarling and twisting impossibly fast. I missed the first shot. He fell silent, eyes distant, reliving that split second where fate teetered on a knife's edge. It charged without warning. We grappled waist, deep in thick bush, its roar shaking the very earth. I'll never forget its hot breath or madness in those eyes. By some small mercy, it tripped, giving me a clean shot finally. Nate swallowed hard, and Martin shook his head slowly. Gone, vanished into the night. Even as we searched with lanterns till dawn, the lion is too clever, too ravaged by demons now. It will not stop until one of us is dead. A chill crept up Nate's spine at those grim portents. Dawn found them haggard but determined, breaking fast around the fire under pewter skies. After the twins woke, Martin pulled Nate aside urgently. "My friend, for the girl's sake, we must end this shadow hanging over our Eden today, before it strikes again. Will you assist me in searching the reserve corner and destroy this beast once and for all, before it further damages innocent lives?" Nate met his steely gaze and nodded. "Lead the way." They gathered their finest trackers and set out at a brisk march, fanning across rolling grasslands in V formation with lanterns swaying. The hunt was on in earnest to track a killer that had evaded all efforts, slipping between mortal grasp like a wraith. Somewhere out there in the dense bush, waiting, a cornered man, Eater would make its final lethal stand. The search party combed the sprawling reserve from dawn till the sun stood directly overhead, finding no fresh signs to track. Tensions mounted as the afternoon waned with still no trace of their wily quarry. Nate paused on a rise, wiping sweat from his brow as he scanned rippling grasslands, shimmering faintly in the heat haze. A glint caught his eye through acacia foliage. Martin's lantern halted a ridge over. He pushed through dense scrub to find Martin kneeling intently. Tracker Bakari beside him, pointing out muddled prints in the dusty soil. It doubled back towards the lodge, Martin murmured, barely audible above birdsong, resuming under a breathless hush. Come, we must hurry before it scents the girls. Dread seized Nate's heart as they broke into a run. The lion was cunningly orchestrating its final confrontation, luring its pursuers away before slipping back unnoticed to claim vulnerable prey, left unguarded. Through parching scrub and thickets they charged, praying not to arrive too late. Breaking from bush, the cabins came into view amid sparse acacias dotting rolling foothills. All seemed tranquil in the shimmering heat, too tranquil. Nate's senses screamed even before he spotted a flash of tawny fur, stalking low around the side of the lodge, mane glowing golden in the midday sun. No, he bellowed, lunging forward and raising his rifle in one fluid motion. But the lion was already coiling to spring, unleashing a nightmarish roar that split the stillness like an animal death cry. Its powerful hindquarters bunched as glazed eyes fixed hungrily on the cabin's open doorway, where small silhouettes appeared in confusion at the commotion. Time slowed to a crawl. During that split second, where destiny hung suspended by a spider's thread. 2 shots cracked as one, echoing endlessly across the plains. The lion arced, impossibly through the air, massive paws outstretched as if to embrace its intended victims already. Then its furious bellow was cut short, mid-roar, powerful body twisting sharply in the sky, before crashing through acacia branches in a bloodied tumble of fur and bone. It lay still. Nate and Martin charged alongside the trackers, rifles raised and eyes scanning for any sign of fresh movement from the felled beast. But stare as they might through gun sights, not even a minuscule twitch marred the gore-streaked flank, rising and falling with rapid, labored breaths. A ragged wound high in the chest, seeped scarlet, one shattered foreleg crunched at an unnatural angle, where Martin's bullet found its mark. But in those half-glazed, burning eyes lingered a sentient light of suffering, and something else hauntingly human, as the lion gazed back at its grim executioners with piercing intelligence, undimmed by ebbing life. A low, gurgling sigh escaped its bloodied jaws. Then the light fluttered and died, as did the terror this stricken creature had unleashed through no fault but misfortune and mankind's greed consuming the wild realms. Its massive frame stilled under the uncaring African sun, the circle of life coming full at long last. Martin closed bleary eyes, exhausted beyond words in body and soul. Nate embraced him tightly, relief and final catharsis, washing through both men who had given so selfly to protect this Eden through fate's cruelest trials. Their battle was won at last, shadows lifting, to reveal resilient bonds of love and spirit that could withstand any nightmare, if only they stood united. And from that reconciliation of persevering hearts, fragile peace took wing again over the wild frontier.